Welcome to Social Media Policy Considerations for Employers. I'm Mike Coffey, President of Imperative Information Group. I'm an HR guy. I've been in and around HR for about 20 years now, and this year I'm privileged to be the President of the Fort Worth Human Resource Management Association, the best little HR house in Texas. I'm also a past member of the Texas Association of Licensed Investigators Board. I'm on the board of the Texas Association of Business. I've served in a variety of positions for the National Association of Professional Background Screeners, and I'm a co-founder of Concerned CRAs, which is a consumer protection group inside the background screening area. And so as you can see, I've got HR experience, but a lot of my background has to do with, my recent background anyway, has to do with background investigations and other kinds of business due diligence, which is primarily what Imperative does, except for my HR consulting. So why am I talking about, of all things, social media if my day job is background checks? And well, that's because, as I said, I get to do a lot of consulting for employers, and social media is an issue that comes up over and over again as employers call me, especially with their employee relations issues. They've already got a problem related to social media, and they call, and we talk about different issues they're having, try to figure out how to help them get out of a mess maybe, or how to respond to something that an employee has posted or something like that. So this webinar is based on a lot of my experiences dealing with our own clients, and because I speak to HR associations and at HR conferences, at least a couple times a month. I've had the privilege of sitting in sessions presented by a lot smarter people than me, and so I have happily plagiarized what I thought was worth stealing from a lot of those presentations as well. Now, this presentation today is focused primarily on considerations for your social media policy that maybe you haven't already considered. We also have another presentation we make from time to time that's focused on the business case for HR's use of social media. And so if that's something else you're considering in your organization, how your HR folks, especially your recruiting team, but also your brand awareness folks, can benefit from social media, you may want to be in that webinar when we offer it next as well. One thing I want to say right up front is that a lot of what people consider social media policy best practices are really best practices across your organization. Your social media policy should really reflect what your the rest of your policies are. There's not much that goes on in social media that's unique to social media. Your employees interact with each other at the local watering hole after work. They take public positions on issues, and they may reflect on your company that way, and certainly they have interactions inside the office. And you've got managers who are numbskulls, and they will do dumb things in a meeting, or they will do dumb things on social media with regard to employees. And so I think your social media policy can actually usually be pretty brief, because in most cases it should say something to the effect of follow all our other procedures when you're on social media just like you would anywhere else. But we're going to talk about a few issues that come up pretty regularly. And the first of those is checking out your applicants. I know a number of you probably have at some point looked into your employees, your candidates' backgrounds on social media. So let's launch this little survey, and you can tell me what your experience is. If you'll just answer there, let's see what kind of response we get here. Go ahead and just answer that survey. Okay, well, let me give you a couple more seconds here, and we will close it. And let me share these results with you. It looks like a fair number of you have at some point or at least will admit that you've Googled a candidate. 32% of you say you've Googled a candidate before. 79% said you've at least gone and looked at their LinkedIn profile. About half of you have looked at their Facebook profile. 16% other social networks. So you're getting more honest. When I first started giving this presentation maybe a couple years ago, I was doing it before live HR audiences, and nobody would admit it in the HR audience, but they would come up afterwards and admit that, yeah, we've done that. Probably also, even if HR is not doing it, you probably have some of your own hiring managers who've done it without your knowledge, and I think that's a bigger problem than HR doing it, because your hiring managers are probably not as objective as you are. So let's talk a little bit about checking out applicants. And the first issue is, that always concerns me about social media, is that you run a high risk of accessing protected class information when you check out your applicants on social media. So maybe you find out that they are over 40, or that they've got some ADA status, or you find out their race or religion issues, or even that they're a member of a labor union, or maybe on Facebook they like the AFL-CIO or something like that. Well, as an employer, clearly you don't want to make any hiring decisions based on that information, but it's hard to put the genie back in the bottle once that information is out. And so now you don't ask this information on your employment application, but now you've got it, and you may end up in a situation where you've got to prove that you didn't use that information in making a hiring decision that was discriminatory. So that's a caution for you. Another issue is that it's easy to take information out of context. You probably have an unwritten rule in your organization that we don't hire freaks, unless maybe you're a head shop or something like that, and maybe you intentionally hire freaks. But let's assume that a lot of organizations have some unwritten rule that this is our company culture, and if you're outside of that, you're probably not a good fit. So let's say you or your hiring manager Googles your candidate, and let's say your candidate in this example is this blonde female. So you Google her, and bam, first thing that comes up, you find this photo of her, and from the interview you say, yeah, that does look like her, and oh my goodness, look who she's hanging out with. And that may give you a cause for concern. Some hiring managers might say, you know what, we're a pretty conservative organization, and I'm not really sure I want someone who hangs out with these kind of people. If she came across good in the interview, or maybe you haven't even done the interview, and they're Googling these candidates as they review the applications. So you find this picture, and alarm bells go off. Well, but if you look deeper into the photo, you see, well, it looks like they're in some sort of ballroom at a hotel or convention center, and it looks like maybe in the background there's a black drape there that has a card on it that's maybe for a vendor's name, like you might see at HR Southwest or the SHRM conference or something like that. And so maybe this person was just at a conference, and this person with the extremely large earlobe and the spike in his lower lip, it was a circus geek of some sort hired by a vendor to draw the attendees to their booth. And maybe she was there with her, one of her colleagues, and her colleague said, hey, get behind, let's take a picture through that guy's earlobe. And she said, okay. And so they took the picture, and from his smartphone, her colleague may have posted this photo and tagged her. She might not even be aware of it. And now this information is out there associated with her name, and it may well be something you take out of context, or your hiring manager takes out of context. So it's hard to, in this one you can at least look at the photo and kind of figure out the context, but there are a lot of situations where the photos or even postings might not even fit the context that you would assume that this person, the context that you draw from, you infer from a post or a photo may not be accurate. And then there's the issue of whether the information is truly job related. I mean, there's times that information may be interesting and certainly prurient, but it may not be something that you're really all that interested in as an employer. Karen Owen is a great example of this. She was a senior in spring of 2010 at Duke University. And what Karen did was not very wise, but it's not uncommon. She put together a PowerPoint. And what she did was evaluated all her sexual conquests throughout her 4 years at Duke and put this in a PowerPoint. And she named, used photos of, members of the rugby team and other young men that she dated over the course of her college life, and evaluated their strengths and weaknesses in a variety of areas, and shared that with a few friends. And just a funny little PowerPoint that she never imagined would be problematic, except that those 3 friends all had access to what? Email. And they shared it with a few other friends, and it got started getting circulated, then it hit the internet and it went viral. So now Karen Owen, you still Google her name, Karen Owen at Duke University, and you find a ton of media articles about this incident. If you Google the names of the young men who were involved, who she rated, you can, they come up in relation to all of this. So is this something really, now that we're 3 years plus away from this clear bad judgment on her part, is this really job related? Or is it just something that's prurient and interesting to know, but maybe not something you really want a hiring manager making a decision based upon? And so you've got to figure, that's another concern. You've got to figure out for yourself in your organization, when would something like this be job related versus something that you should probably look away from. And again, the biggest issue is, how do you keep the wrong information from coming back and biting you? Even if you don't use it, once you've seen it, you can't unsee it. And so once this information has reached you or your hiring manager, you're in a situation where you may have to defend that you didn't use this information incorrectly. So what we recommend that our clients do is set up a firewall between, if they decide to do social media searches, they want to set up a firewall between the person doing the search and the hiring decision makers. And so you may have someone in your HR office who has your clearly written criteria for how you're going to evaluate social media information, and versus those people look at that, and then anything that is directly in line with your policy that the hiring manager or the recruiter should be made aware of, they pass that information on without passing on the person's age, race, sex, national origin, ADA status, any of those kinds of things, and certainly no photos or anything like that, unless it's showing something like something illegal activity, drug abuse, something like that. And you probably want a policy that says we're concerned about these kind of issues, and we'll talk about that again in a little bit, but you want a policy that outlines the kinds of issues you're concerned about without getting into, and the kinds of issues you're not. And so the great thing about this is your local, you can have a local resource inside your HR department or maybe your security department who does this research for you, or you can send it out to your background screening company, but you want to be real careful there because the Fair Credit Reporting Act now applies to the report. But then they just pass on to you only those things that are that are deemed by your own policy as job-related. Let's talk about monitoring our own employees. We've all seen this. This is Harry Potter, and that's him reaching for the golden snitch. And we've got golden snitches in our organization too, don't we? They come to the HR office and knock on the door, and they say, I really don't want you to do anything about this, but, and then they go off and leave a dump truck full of junk on your desk. And now you as HR have to figure out what's going on. So somebody comes to you and they say, John put this on his Facebook page and I'm concerned about it. It makes the company look bad. Sometimes it's something you really need to know about, something coercive or threatening, but a lot of times it's just petty employee stuff, personality stuff. People get their sweaters unraveled over silly things, and they post stuff on Facebook, and then somebody else is offended, and next thing you know, you get a whole employee relations uproar because of what's on social media. So if you're going to monitor in some respect employee social media, either proactively or reactively, there are some considerations you need to have. First is, of course, you've got the challenge that there's such thing as protected concerted activity, and you just because you see on Facebook that one of your employees suddenly likes the AFL-CIO or is following the National Labor Relations Board on Twitter or something like that, you pose a risk of getting in trouble there if you take action against them based on that, because there's it could be seen that you're dissuading them and coercively preventing them from concerted activity with one another or pursuing their rights under the National Labor Relations Act. The NLRB has published a number of papers on this and briefs on all of this information, and I'm sure you've heard about all of these, so let's just go through a scenario here. Under the current NLRB guidance, you have a situation where somebody might post something, and let's say they post on Facebook that XYZ, the company, your company, sucks, and their boss, Joe Smith, is a jerk. So your employee posts that, and then there's a response from the employee's helicopter mom, who's always in the HR office complaining about this or that and how her son's treated unfairly, and those kinds of things. And we've all dealt with parents or spouses that are like that. And so mom responds, hang in there, poor baby. Do you want me to call him and set him straight? So, and this comes to your attention in HR. Let's take a real quick survey. And I'll ask, according to the NLRB, is this actionable? Can you, as an employer, take action against the employee based on this series of postings in social media? Okay, let's go ahead and close that. And let me share the results with you. 24% of you said yes, you can take action on this, and 76% said no, you cannot. So let's go back and look at the interaction again. The employee complained to cyberspace on Facebook or Twitter or whatever that negative stuff about the company and his boss. The only response received in this scenario was from the employee's mom, let's say, and let's clarify that she doesn't work for the company. And a quarter of you said yes, you could take action, and 3/4 said no, you couldn't under the NLRB. And actually, the yeses have it. You could take adverse action against this employee because for something to be concerted protected activity, it has to be 2 or more employees carrying on the discussion. And the NLRB's published documents on this and opinions, published legal opinions on this, all say that the interaction has to be between 2 or more employees. So you're looking at something like this. Joe posts something on Facebook or Twitter or whatever, and a coworker says, "Yeah, I couldn't believe he said that in our meeting. Our poor customers." And so that goes beyond just talking about employment work situations, talks about customers. But that, according to the National Labor Relations Board's opinions, is protected concerted activity. And they've ruled on this a number of times. It doesn't mean that I'm saying you do want to take action in the first instance or that you don't want to take action in the second instance. I'm saying you need to understand the NLRB has strong opinions on that, and I would really strongly suggest that your training for your management and any policies you write say that before taking any action, we're going to review the NLRB position on this and maybe talk to our legal counsel without running out there and doing something that may get us in trouble for limiting people's rights under the National Labor Relations Act, unfair employment practice kind of situations. But there are times where, as an employer, you will see a legitimate interest in taking action. Back in 2010, the local radio sports station here in Dallas-Fort Worth had a producer named Mike Bassick, and he made the mistake of watching a Dallas Mavericks basketball game against the hated San Antonio Spurs in a bar with a smartphone. And so after Dallas lost to the Spurs, he starts tweeting about the game. And I guess as the night goes on and he has more to drink, then he starts tweeting about the Spurs, and then he starts tweeting negatively about the whole city of San Antonio, and it continues, and he starts tweeting about the racial composition of the city of San Antonio, and it turns into what was probably intended to be funny racial comments, but were interpreted by a lot of people as racial slurs. And the next day, Cumulus Media, who owns the ticket, had to suspend him and ultimately fired him because he's a radio personality with a lot of followers, and they couldn't have an employee who was that public doing something like that, and you can imagine why. And then back in 2012, April of last year, the Miami-Dade Fire Rescue Department had to respond to a Facebook post by one of its captains who posted some stuff that was a little inflammatory related to the Trayvon Martin shooting. And that was a, they were concerned about some of the comments, and this is a public agency that has to deal with the public, including African American communities and things like that, and they were concerned that they may have a problem with a captain out there who may not have credibility in the communities they serve, and it may be a challenge for them to be able to execute their mission because of this person's rather public venting concerning the Trayvon Martin shooting. So they looked into that. So those are the issues that you, as an employer, may need to look into, and they may be something that's problematic for you, and you want to, and so there are times where you've probably got a bona fide interest in what your employees are posting out there. And then there's this guy. You probably remember this guy. This is Jared Loughner, the mentally ill person who shot Congresswoman Giffords and a number of other people. I think he killed 6 people in Arizona. Within hours of that shooting, the media had all his social media publications out there, videos that he had posted on the internet, and all this crazy stuff that he had put out on the internet. And the question is, this wasn't a workplace shooting, but had it been a workplace shooting and the media went out there and found all this stuff about this guy, and we've seen that repeatedly. We've seen it with the Boston bombers. We've seen it with the Navy shipyard guy, the shooter from earlier this week at the Naval Shipyard in D.C. First thing the media does is go look these people up on social media and start publishing this stuff. So if this Jared Loughner and any of these other ones had been workplace violence, and it's a matter of time before there's a high-profile one, unfortunately, that is workplace violence, the media is going to go look at all their social media stuff. And is the public going to be understanding when the company says, yeah, well, we didn't know that he had all these crazy ideas and that he was clearly deranged because we didn't look at his social media policy. It was, yeah, it was out there and it was in the public domain, readily accessible to any of us, but we just never went and looked at it. The question for your company is will the public accept that? What will that do to your company's reputation? And maybe you're in an environment and in an industry where it's not that important, but maybe you're in other industries, financial services, or an industry that deals with vulnerable populations, things like that, where the public and perhaps a jury may not be so forgiving of you not having reviewed that information. So it kind of puts employers in a position where maybe you're in a rock and a hard place. You're damned if you do and you're damned if you don't get this this right balance between these issues. And then of course there's LinkedIn, and this is something that's come up quite a bit as I've talked to HR people at different conferences. And it's not usually the HR people, but it's either senior executives or hiring managers who have their own policies that say that if someone indicates on LinkedIn that they're actively interested in career opportunities or job inquiries, then they may, we may have to exclude them from future projects. Or, I had one executive tell me that once I know that somebody is looking for other positions, I assume that they're actively disengaged in their current job, and we start working to get rid of them. So that's probably not your best management approach, but let's see how many of you have companies that that actively look at this kind of issue. Do you have policies that address this? %100 of you, okay, let's close that, 100% of you said no, you do not have a policy that addresses how your company is going to treat employees who are indicating on LinkedIn that they're actively seeking a new position. My suggestion is, if you've got management, if you know your management are actively on LinkedIn, either helping recruiters find candidates, or just for whatever reason out on LinkedIn, maybe looking for their next job, that you might want to consider having a policy that says that we understand LinkedIn is out there, we want the very best for every one of our employees, and we want to do everything we can to retain our good employees, but we are not going to take any adverse action against someone when we find out that they are actively interested in other opportunities. Because if we're honest, I think most of us are. Everybody is but me. I'm after having worked for myself for the last 14, almost 15 years, I am pretty unemployable. Nobody would have me. But by and large, most people are looking for their next position at some point. jump down to the question box. Has this ever come up in any of your, if anybody's ever had that come up, drop me a line in the question box, because I'm always curious if anybody's ever had anything like that come up that you want to share. And then there's the issue of online fraternization. Do you have a policy that says, oh, I need to change screens, there you go. Do you have a policy that says that our supervisors can or cannot be social media buddies with their subordinates? Let's look at that. Have you ever looked at that issue inside your organization? Launch this poll. There you go. Let me know how many of you have some policy related to that. Does your company allow supervisors to be friends with their subordinates on social media? Okay, going to go ahead and close that. Let's look at the results. Most of you, only about 20% of you, have even addressed that, 18%, and the rest of you haven't even addressed it, and it's split between yes and no, 9%, 9% on yes and no. So, well, there are pros and cons to it. The pros are that if you've got smart managers who know how to post responsibly and who don't do boneheaded things online, that they would never think of doing in the office with an employee, but won't share posts or do things that would be inappropriate in a subordinate manager relationship, then maybe that's fine. Maybe it helps build team cohesion. Maybe it's something that even helps you recruit. If people have that camaraderie online, maybe employees are more likely to share postings about open positions and things like that with their network. So there may be some positives to that. I can tell you from my own experience, I've always been pretty open about networking with my employees. We have 15 employees here, so we're a smaller office, but if an employee reaches out to me to be a friend on Facebook, I will accept their post. To be honest, I usually hide them because most of them, most of my employees are young, and their jackassery is more than I can put up with in my news feed. But I usually accept it. I've got a policy that I don't reach out to my employees to be their friends because I don't want them to feel coerced into that. But if they reach out to me, I'll do it. Well, I did that, and that was my policy for a long time. And then I had an employee who had some performance issues, and suddenly I found that I was looking at her performance issues in light of the things I knew about her from social media, and I had to consistently remind myself to manage her performance and not her behavior outside of work. And even though I was convinced there was a strong correlation between the two, I had to consistently remind myself, don't tell her, yeah, it'd probably be easier to get to work on time on Monday morning if you weren't out Sunday night checking in at the bar at 10 o'clock, that kind of issue. And so I had to keep my mouth shut about any of those extraneous issues and just focus on her, specific performance. But maybe you've got hiring managers who aren't that adept at that. Another issue you might have is like this one that you've got on your screen. This is Peter Tavere. He worked for the Library of Congress. And on Facebook, he was friends with his manager, a guy named John Meck. And Peter liked the Two Dads page on Facebook. It's a group that helps promote the gay and lesbian community. And so, and when he liked that on Facebook, his boss saw that, oh, he likes that, and then figured out that, oh, Peter must be gay. And as soon as he figured that out, Peter's previously always positive performance reviews turned negative, according to his allegations, and his boss started making derogatory statements about his sexual orientation. The boss was as it turns out, was a very conservative Christian and had a problem with that lifestyle, with homosexuality, and so he started making comments in the workplace negative about homosexuality and Peter's presence, and giving him a negative, writing him about his performance at a much higher level than he ever had previously. And so ultimately, Peter Tavere complained and threatened a lawsuit against the Library of Congress. He's a federal government employee, so there were a host of other issues related to his complaint. But do you really want to deal with this in your HR department? If you've got some managers who you think may end up friending employees and then taking action related to that, you might want to be more cautious in your policy about who can have those kinds of friendships online, and maybe you say that you're not allowed to fraternize online with your subordinates. And if you say just your subordinates, then does that mean they can fraternize with members in other departments? Because what happens, somebody gets promoted into a new position, and now suddenly they're the supervisor of some people who they are friends with on social media, and how do you address those issues? So there are a lot of things to think about. Let me see, I've got a question here. The first, is an employer really allowed to do that? I think an employer can tell a member of management that our company policy is that you don't fraternize with your subordinates online. I think you can safely say that, and there are companies that do that, and I'm not aware of any state laws that would prevent it. Certainly no federal laws that would prevent it. Now, what's that going to do to your morale with your management group? You're going to have to decide in your culture if that's appropriate or not. But there's no law that I'm aware of that would prevent that. Now, some employees may not like that, and you may have to toe the water for the company on that as to why that's necessary. But if that's the policy decision you make, that's what you you can certainly do that. I mean, there are policies against, employers have policies against dating online, things like that, or dating, inside the company, and all kinds of things like that. So certainly you as a company could discourage that. Now you've got to decide, and as long as you don't have any NLRB issues there, so as long as that person is truly a member of management under the National Labor Relations Act, a supervisor, a member of management, as opposed to an employee, you'll be fine. Now, you may have a challenge under the NLRB's opinions if you tell employees they cannot friend one another if they're in the same class and category. That may be an issue for you. You've got to be careful about that. So that's what, but I am seeing employers who are doing that, having a policy. And I think you need to at least consider what your company position is going to be if these things come up. And you may say, our company position is when I'm going to address it, but I think you're better off at least thinking through it than not to, and then just ignore the issue. And when the issue comes up, ask yourself, well, what should our policy be or have been? And now let's talk about online references. Especially on LinkedIn, there's the opportunity to recommend people, and LinkedIn's got a pretty robust system where you can tell people about your experiences working with someone, and how great they were. I've never seen a LinkedIn recommendation that's negative. They're all pretty positive and usually glowing. that might present a problem for an employer. Let's talk about that. How many of you have policies that allow, specifically allows or disallows supervisors from giving recommendations online? Let's see here. We've got quite a few of you have responded. I'm going to go ahead and give you a couple more seconds. I'm going to close it at 30 seconds. Okay, let me close that. Let's look at the results. 83% of you haven't addressed that. 8% of you said yes, you do allow it. And 8% say your policy says no, we don't allow it. Well, let's talk about that. It's what we're talking about in this situation is management references for employees. So do you have a policy already that says all employment references go through HR? Most employers do. If somebody wants to verify somebody's work history, my company, we call and do employment verifications every day. We do, hundreds of them, and we talk to employers all the time, and often employers, supervisors will say, sorry, I have to send you to HR. Company policy says that I can't share any information about this person. So if that's your policy, why do you let hiring managers or letting supervisors share recommendations on LinkedIn? That's kind of a challenge for you. It can come back to bite you. Let's look how. Let's say that Joe Smith is the manager, and he hires, or he online on LinkedIn, he puts a recommendation out there for his administrative assistant, Diana. And he says, I have supervised Diana for 2 years. She is great. She always anticipates and exceeds my expectations. Wonderful gal. And that was in January. So, and the problem, I didn't turn off let me hide that. So you get a great recommendation for Diana on the on LinkedIn. And the problem with LinkedIn is that the employee has the ability to send a request for a recommendation to somebody, and you kind of feel like a heel if you don't respond, don't you? So you feel like, I need to respond to this. I'll say something nice about her, and because I have to deal with her every day, and I don't want it to be all negative out there. So he goes and says nice things about her on January 20th of 2012. Then it's time for Diana's performance review in March. So 2 months later, we're there, and not even 2 months, January 20th to March 1st, about 6 weeks or so. And here's Diana's performance review. And let's say the criteria is that how she supports her manager and the team with administrative tasks, and the rating is negative. It requires immediate improvement, termination imminent. And so suddenly she's at DEFCON 4, she's about to get terminated, but 6 weeks earlier you just posted on Facebook how wonderful she was. Can anybody see a wrongful termination suit coming when suddenly Diana says, well, yeah, Joe said I was great in January, then he terminated me in March or April and gave me a bad performance evaluation? Is that, what happened between these two? Well, I felt pressured to put that, Joe says, I felt pressured to put that positive recommendation, for her on LinkedIn, and I did that, trying to be a nice guy, but her performance wasn't there. So either Joe lied on LinkedIn or he lied on the performance evaluation. It doesn't look good for the employer either way. This is a great example of where your policy for the rest of the real world should match your social media policy as well. If you don't allow supervisors and managers to give references, for former employees, then why would you let them give recommendations on LinkedIn? Something to think about. that may come back and, bite you in the future. So let's go on to the next issue. Who owns these relationships, all these social media relationships that you might have with, that your employees might have with customers and the public on your behalf? There was well, let's see here. Let's just talk about it first. How many of you have policies that dictate who owns a social media relationship? Read that question, give me a response here. Wow, okay, quite a few of you do have policies that address that. Okay, 10 more seconds. Okay, let's close that out. And let me share those results with you. As you can see, 30% of you have a policy that says who owns those social media relationships, and 70% of you haven't addressed it yet. So let's talk about it. There is a company called PhoneDog.com, and it's like a mobile technology website. They ended up suing a former employee who changed his Twitter account name to his personal name after he left the company, and he took 17,000 followers with him. So what happened was this guy, Phone Dog Noah, built a Twitter account. Phone Dog was the name of the company, and his name was Noah, and so he went out there and built a big following of about 17,000 people following him, and he would post things on his Twitter account about mobile technology and things that were of interest to the people that were interested in that website, and he would post personal information as well, so it was all commingled, which is a great thing about social media. You can get to know people, and it's a great way for your brand to personalize itself with your audience. So Phone Dog Noah ends up leaving the company, and so when he leaves the company, he just changed the name of his Twitter handle from Phone Dog Noah to Noah Kravitz, his actual name. So it's the same account, he just changed the name on it. And what happened? That means he took all those followers with him, and there was nobody left listening to the Phone Dog tweets, because there were no Phone Dog tweets. That account was gone now. And so who owns those relationships? That's a really important thing for you to consider, especially if you've got people in your sales department or in your tech department, or who are actively engaging your outside audiences with regard to using social media. You need to make sure that your policy says, yeah, this is part of your job. You can personalize it within acceptable limits, but you agree at the outset that this social media policy or the social media account belongs to us, the company, and that you'll keep us updated with passwords and access to these accounts, which are company accounts, not personal accounts. And then what about the relationships in LinkedIn? Many of you have CRMs, customer relationship management databases. So these are databases that your Salesforce uses, maybe your tech support people use to track information about your customers and people you come in contact with. And over time, you develop a pretty good database of those people, and you know when they bought and what their interests were and all that. Well, I'm hearing more and more from employers that what their problem is they're having a hard time keeping their Salesforce in line and getting them to use the CRM because they just use LinkedIn instead. It's easy to connect to people on LinkedIn. You've got all their information. It's updated all the time. And so they're not putting all this contact information inside of the CRM because it's all on LinkedIn. Well, what happens? That person leaves employment, and say they've got 500 plus connections that they developed through the course of their employment with you. They developed relationships with all these people, and they leave the company, and the next thing you know, well, your CRM is empty, or or it never was fully populated because this super salesperson was using LinkedIn to keep track of everybody. And so you need to make it clear that we have a policy that says you use the customer relationship management software, and it's supposed to be kept up to date. That we any correspondence that you have with a potential or actual customer through LinkedIn or other social media is fine, because I don't think you're ever going to prohibit that. But but it's got to also be documented. All that information's got to be documented inside of our CRM or whatever other process or policy you have. So does your policy say, address how you're going to retrieve all this contact information after this person leaves? Do you have your non-compete or non-solicitation agreements in place? And do they say that these relationships, outside that were developed in the course of work, belong to the company? And how do you, that employee at a minimum has a responsibility for keeping the company system up to date? And what does your policy say about removing references to the company once the person is terminated? So when they no longer work there, but they've got your company name still listed as their current employer on LinkedIn, have you told them as they exit your organization, we need you to update your social media statuses to remove references to the company with regard to where you currently work, or maybe even deeper than that, if somebody's got a personal blog, things like that, referencing the company, you may ask them as part of their severance agreement to clean some of that up as well. So those are things you need to be thinking about. And last, social media is a 24-hour event. There's always something going on, and it's always available, always connected. And with the advent of smartphones, you don't even have to turn your computer on. You sit down at the breakfast table first thing in the morning with your cup of coffee, and first thing you do, or first thing I do anyway, is open my email on my phone and check Facebook on my phone. And if you're really interested in interesting places to eat in Fort Worth, you probably want to follow me, be my friend on Facebook. But I post almost nothing about work. Almost all my Facebook stuff is with friends. But that's the first thing I do in the morning is read it. And I have a lot of clients who are friends, and so I see a lot of information about my clients, which is a whole other issue. But it's open all the time. So but what if you've got people whose job is to monitor a social media account for the company? So it's after hours, but they know the best time to send tweets for their audience is at 7 o'clock at night or something like that. Or you want to send some tweets out first thing in the morning before the office hours even open. Remember that if this person is non-exempt, that's compensable time. And so you're responsible maybe even for overtime for that 10 minutes that they spend checking the company Facebook account each evening or each morning, or sending a tweet out on behalf of the company. If you haven't addressed it, that means you're suffering them to work, and you have to compensate them for that. So that maybe you have a policy that says, or it's in this person's job description, and it says your job is to monitor the social media account, and you're only to do that during regular work business hours. Unless you're told to otherwise, and then you'll be compensated accordingly, and it's your job to report it according to our time and attendance policies. So you need to think through that. Otherwise, you may get stung once this employee down the road becomes disenchanted, maybe, and you've got to respond to a claim for unpaid overtime or even regular time. So it's something to remember that anybody who's tweeting or doing anything like that on behalf of the company, you need to be aware of. And let's go to questions. If anybody has any, you can put them down in the question box. There's one here. Let me read it while the rest of you post any other issues. I'm not sure I understand why a supervisor shouldn't give an endorsement for a coworker's skill set on LinkedIn. We do not allow recommendations, but endorsements are a no-no too. I don't think there's a difference between an endorsement or a recommendation. If you're saying LinkedIn has an opportunity for you to say, Mike Coffey knows about human resources, Mike Coffey knows about this, Mike Coffey knows about that, you're saying, in effect, that this person knows what they're doing and that they're competent in whatever skill set area that is. And if you think you may end up terminating that employee in the future, do you really want it out there that this person gave a thumbs up, this manager who's subsequently terminating this person gave a thumbs up to the employee just a few months ago? I just don't think there's any reason that you would have an employer sharing any of their experiences with an employee that publicly. Positive or negative. You know, I'm a background screening company, and there are reasons that employers don't give us information, and there are good reasons for employers to give us information, and even for managers and supervisors to share information. But it needs to be done according to a well thought out process, and not just at the whim of, okay, I opened LinkedIn and a pop-up box came up to the top of my screen and asked me if I wanted to endorse somebody's expertise in human resources or recruiting or whatever it is. I don't think that's how you want the company's, you know, anything that could appear to be the company's position on this employee shared. And Rodney wants to argue with me, which is fine too. Mike, isn't there a distinct difference between stating that you believe an employee has a certain skill set and demonstrating that they flawlessly demonstrate and use that skill set? Maybe, and that may be the question you have to answer on the stand, and that's a distinction that you know, if this gets to, you know, we're only talking about litigation here. If you're not afraid of litigation and giving, you know, somebody who may ultimately sue you or contest an unemployment claim, you know, for a termination reason, something like that. If you don't think you'll ever have to contest that and defend the hiring manager's position on something like that, then go ahead and do it. I've got no problem with it. I'm just saying you need to understand that it's only a matter of time, with as often as this stuff's happening, before you're going to end up with an employee who gets terminated by a manager. And maybe your organizations are exceptional compared to some of the ones I've worked with, and I've worked with a lot of great ones. But almost every organization has some boneheaded manager out there who doesn't think about what he's doing. And one day he's in a good mood, and so this employee is wonderful. And the next day he's in a bad mood, and this employee is the worst thing he's ever seen. And I agree it's a management issue, and you want to train to that and develop your managers better. But in the meantime, do you really want managers giving those kind of off-the-cuff recommendations or endorsements of people's skill sets when, you know, a month or two later, or at some point, they may say something negative about, you know, that employee in a performance evaluation or something else. I'm just saying, consider it. You know, I'm not saying it's a hard and fast rule that you don't want to do it, but I don't see any value to the company from you doing it, and I see a potential downside to it. And believe me, I'm not one of these guys who says do what your lawyers say all the time so you never get sued, because I'm all for getting sued when there's a good business case for taking the action. I just don't see the business case in this one. And okay, Rodney said I'm just playing devil's advocate. He agrees with me, so he's a really bright guy after all. Is there any precaution to take if an employee endorses your company on a social media, or is that acceptable? Yes, that's an interesting question. Employee endorsements, the issue is the Federal Trade Commission has chimed in on that issue. So if an employee is endorsing your product online, there's no problem with that as long as the employee has identified themselves as an employee of the company so people can fairly evaluate it. Otherwise, the FTC has said that, and I'm going to get their exact language wrong, but basically they've said that's misleading or false advertising for an endorsement out there to not reflect the relationship between the endorser and the company. That's why you see those in commercials. It always says paid endorsement, things like that across the bottom, so that you know that, yeah, well, maybe they're saying nice things about this amazing foot cream, but in fact they're saying it, maybe because they're being paid to say it. And the same thing would go for an employee. There's nothing wrong with the company saying, if you want to, express your opinions about the company in a positive way that promotes the growth of the company, we welcome that. And but here are the guidelines for it. Any other questions I can answer for anybody out there? And just as with everything, take everything. I could be the biggest nutcase you've ever met, and there are probably people who will tell you I am. So take everything you hear from me with a grain of salt. Take it back to your organization, kick it around, see if it's a good fit for your culture. Maybe talk to your own legal counsel about your responses, and I promise they'll be much more conservative than I am probably. But think about these things. That's my request to you. And so now the webinar is almost over, and at the end of the webinar this afternoon we will be sending an email out to everybody with the HRCI information, because this is pre-approved for an hour of general recertification credit through HR Certification Institute. And then we will also send you a link to download the slides, and the slides have a few more notes on them, so that may be helpful to you as well. And if we'll go on, if there's nothing else, we'll end the webinar now. And I appreciate everybody. We've got some other webinars coming up, including several through the fall related to the Fair Credit Reporting Act, the background checks and the EEOC, and some other issues. So you can find all of those at our website, imperativeinfo.com. And finally, if there's if something comes up that we can help you with in the area of background investigations, or just reviewing your current background screening process for FCRA and Title VII compliance, anything like that, or just you need a good company with good customer service and somebody you can trust to help you with background checks, please don't hesitate to give me a call. My phone number is right there, and my email. And if we're a good fit, I would love to serve you. And we're going to go ahead and end now. I appreciate it. Thank you, everyone.